Okay, welcome back. In this unit 1.2, we'll talk about clues for uncovering data. This is like getting a state of mind that is sensitive to data in a way that when you encounter data, you know that it is data. So we'll talk about clues for knowing that there is data out there. And we'll employ this idea of having a data state of mind. And that's what we'll do starting next line. Thank you so much. Welcome to Unit 1. In this unit, we'll talk about identifying data and obtaining data. Well, we encounter data all the time. We're surrounded by data. Starting from a traffic ticket to census reports, we encounter data every step of life. The question is, how do you know there is data? How to obtain that data? Well, that's what we're going to talk about in 3 chapters in this unit. The chapters are number 2, 3, and 4. And the main objective is to know how to identify if there is data and then where do we need to go to get that data. For that, you need to have a data state of mind, and that's what we'll talk about. Okay, the chapter 2 is about clues for uncovering data. It's about identifying data. And we have 4 outcomes for this chapter. First, we'll talk about why data agencies or why agencies use data, analyze data, and publish data. Then we'll talk about clues from data input, clues from data output. Then we'll talk about some tricks and tips specific to uncovering data from these 2 sources. Let's talk about the first one first. The reasons why data agencies collect, analyze, and publish data. So why do agencies keep, process, publish data? Well, there are 3 reasons why they do it. They do it for one or more of these reasons. The first most common reason why agencies use data and process data and publish data is has to do with the law. They may just do it because the law requires them to do it. And there's several laws in the United States specific to several agencies that require these agencies to actually um, make this data available to the um, people, and for several reasons. Um, then comes the other reason why agencies usually hold data uh, to be actually more efficient in running the agency or the government. So they can take measures based on data or decisions based on data. So this goes back to chapter 1 when we talked about how data in general would be helpful in making decisions. So the agency itself can use the information from this data to make changes to the way they run the agency. Another reason why agencies actually keep data has to do with the Open Government Initiative, where um, the data that is collected from people is supposed to be available to everyone, and we have right to know the data. The data can be related to um, credit card information, credit usage information, census information, demographic information, um, tax written information, and specific to region, state, or the entire country. People have the right to know these things. Now, these are 3 common reasons why data agencies actually store data. And coming to data state of mind, why is it important to know the reasons why they uh, um, use data or save data? Well, if we know the reason why they use data, we will know the ways to actually get to the data. So, for instance, if the data is only collected for the sake of law, just because they are required, then you may not explicitly see data that is useful to you. In such case, you need to dig deeper and find ways to get to the real data. Um, if the information is posted with the purpose of making people informed about things, again, then it's easier to get that data. And there is a different set of instructions or strategies we can use. So that's why we need to know the reason why agencies keep data. Well, now that we know the most common reasons why agencies store data, now let's move on to the second objective outcome, which is clues from data input. What it is related to is how do we know something about data by looking at the way that data is input into the system. Just by looking at that, you can gather some information about the data itself. For instance, let's say you got a traffic ticket. Well, the officer would collect data about the traffic violation or whatever, or the reason was in a form, and you get to sign the form if you ever encounter um, such a situation. And by looking at the information you're giving in that ticket, you can think about the data that is collected from these tickets and visualize that data as having information about the name, having information about the driver's license, having information about the type of violation, and a lot of other things. So just by looking at how the information is collected can give a lot of information, can give us a lot or tell us a lot about the actual data that is being created from these data input sources. So, how do agencies input data? Well, the most commonly used ways of inputting data, uh, especially by government agencies, is through using forms. The forms either could be online forms or they could be paper forms. And these are the most two common ways people collect data. Um, for instance, when you go to a government agency, you will be given a form to fill, right? This form acts as an input. Whenever an agency or organization is asking you to answer questions, then they are most likely, they're actually creating a data set, a database. Usually, most often, it's in the form of paper trails, and people in the government agency actually use your responses from these paper um, forms and fill them in into the computer. That's how they collect data. Um, there are online forms that you'll fill before you meet with somebody or someone or some organization. Now, that's another form, the other way of collecting data. Take your census report, for instance, or census data, for instance. You get to answer some specific questions by now it is online. Sometimes it would be paper, right? If it is paper, either people will enter that information um, manually into the computers, or The forms themselves, though they are in the paper format, can be run through a scanning machine that captures these responses and enters this data into the database. So, so they're different. The point is that whenever you are giving you information, you need to for you to be in the data state of mind. Ask this question: where is this information going? Is this information so specific and so organized that actually goes to a specific place called database? That could be the source. And then we can learn a lot about the nature of the data set. We can think about, oh, okay, this particular data set will definitely have information about name, whatever that information that you're filling in that particular form, whether it's online or whether it's offline. Offline meaning on the paper. Now that's about two forms of collecting data, the most commonly used ways of collecting data, the forms, web forms and the online forms. Sorry, the web/online forms and the paper forms. There are other high-tech ways of collecting data. Um, Sometimes you um, see in some government agencies they collect data in a handheld device. So they may give you a parking ticket, but instead of writing it on a piece of paper, they would actually use their handheld device and input the information and print it and give it to you. Well, that means that this handheld device that is collecting specific information sends this information somewhere and helps in developing this database. Um, Now, they may not do it right away, where the information that is entered in the handheld is automatically sent to the database. That would be really high tech. But mostly, what happens is these data, and at the end of the day, these handheld devices would go to um, the center. The central station where this handheld device would be connected in either manually or through Bluetooth or other ways where the information gets pulled out of these devices and sent to this database. So, or take for instance, they may actually have more sophisticated devices like computers. And most of the times, if you're are driving and if you're get a ticket, it's not only the paper trial, but also they will take your credit card information. Sorry, they'll take your driver's license and they actually run it through a machine in the vehicle, right? What it means is that they are pulling the database based on this information about you, right? That means that all the data about you is stored somewhere. Um, or they may also enter this paper data into the data set right away by putting this information in this computer. So the idea is that there are different ways of inputting data into the system. By just looking at the the way it is inputted, you can learn a lot about the kind of information that you can expect in the database that stores this information. It sounds like straightforward, right? If you're filling this form, then the data set that is, or the database that is developed based on these forms would have a table with several columns specific to information such as, for instance, what is the question that's being asked here? Your license number, right? City, state, zip code, um, um, and so on and so forth. So you can imagine a table with columns and rows. Columns are specific to the labels of the information that is being collected, like city, state, zip code. And the rows would be specific to one individual providing that information. So you can visualize the structure of the data and the kind of information that you will find um, in databases by just looking at the way that it is input into the system, irrespective of whether the input is through physical paper or online forms or through high-tech devices. And one way to get your hands on the forms, especially the online forms or the printed version of these forms in the paper format, um, in order to see, there is a place where you can actually find most of the forms that the government uses by going to this URL. It's the forms.gov. And as you can see here, when you put this information in the browser, it will take you to the .usagov site, and specifically it will list all the forms that the government uses by agency. So if you click on this, you would go to a site or to the page where you can access board forms. Then if you actually click here, you'll go to the Administration for Children and Families specific forms. Um, and this one would be specific to the Native Americans, Administration for Native Americans. So the government forms, you can access those by looking at the structure of these forms. You can make guesses about the kind of the database that they are developing. um, so yeah, well, I really want you to kind of put this information in the browser, this URL, and go to the website and see what different agencies are listed, and look at a sample form and see what kind of information it takes in. Now you might be thinking like, how is this related to the main bigger picture of asking a question and finding an answer? Remember, the um, basic paradigm is everything you learn in this class is specific to asking a question and answering the question. Well, if you think about it, if you have, say, for example, question about, I don't know, for instance, the firearms, let's say, and so when you have questions related to firearm accidents in a place, or stolen firearms in a particular state or in a particular city, well, you're starting from nowhere, right? Your question is starting from nowhere. How do I report anything or learn anything or make sense of anything about this particular event or this particular information or this particular phenomenon about, say, firearms being stolen? Well, one way to learn more about this is by actually going or looking at the forms, right? You can go to this particular form or this particular agency and look at the forms they use and look at the forms specific to stolen firearm information. Then you can imagine a database having information in the form of columns related to the form itself that you're looking at. So that's the point. The point is, if you look at the forms that are used to collect data, you can actually get a lot of information about the data itself. And then you'll also know how you can answer the question eventually. Now, here is a clue. Most of these forms are web forms. And when the data is collected using web forms, or anywhere you're filling information in, one clue to know whether this information is going to database or not is by looking at the URL link and specifically paying attention to these ends like .php. .php is like a language, a programming language that lets these web forms, let them pass this information to different databases. So if there is a php to the URL, that means this information is sent to a specific database. Sometimes you also see .cfm, which is basically Adobe Cold Fusion. This again is an indication that this data is being automatically sent to a data set. Another commonly used URL symbols or structures would be .asp. It's a Microsoft server page, and when you see ASP, then you should know .asp. .asp. So then you can be sure that this information is automatically being sent to a specific database. Or sometimes you can also see um, other kinds of URLs, but these are the most common forms of URLs, which gives us indication about the fact that this information is sent to the database. Now, here's the thing. How does it help us? Well, whenever you see .php, .asp, or .cfm, for a given form that you're looking at, first of all, you can be assured that there is database related to it. Then you can also be sure about the structure of this data set. The input that you're filling, the blanks or the boxes you're filling in this form, are the columns of the database: name, address, date of the incident, and so on and so forth. So whatever information is being filled in is in a specific column. So you can kind of get a picture of the database or the data set that you're interested in, which is a part of a bigger database, by looking at the form. And one way to know that there is a form is by looking at these extensions, the URL extensions, .php, .cfm, and .asp. Okay, I also strongly suggest that um, try to find such forms by going to the forms.gov site, or use these to specific links and try to see and kind of think about what kind of data set it would be, what kind of information it would have. Just explore the web form. Now, remember, we're talking about clues for uncovering data. One way to guess the structure of the data set that you might access or you might get access to is by looking at how the information is input, right? But there's another way that you can make educated guesses about the structure of the data set depending on the data output. Some government agencies are required to create um, regular reports of out of the data that they collect. Either they do it by themselves or they may ask other agencies to actually create reports out of it. So if forms is one way of making um, um, guesses about the data structure, the reports that are developed from these databases could be another way of um, of visualizing the nature of the data set. That's what we'll talk about in the next slide. Clues from the data output, meaning the reports. So let's look at it this way. If there is a database, the forms, online forms or paper forms or the handheld devices, they act as the input to develop this database. There is an output to the database that is readily available in the form of the reports. Some agencies are required to create reports. So by looking at the forms or data collection, um, gives us information of the nature of the database. So also the outputs that are generated from these databases, by looking at this, you can actually make some information about the database itself. So most of the agencies are required, especially the executive agencies. The executive agencies can be federal level, could be at the state level, or it could be at the local or the municipality levels. They usually generate some reports and publish them regularly on the website. And when you look at that particular report, you can make out a lot of information about the database, and also you be certain that, oh, there is definitely a data set out there. Let's look at this particular data set report here. This is the data report developed by the Texas Parks and Wildfire Department. What it does is it actually controls and regulates hunting in states, and it also issues the licenses to hunters. As a part of their job, they also are required to report any accidents. Um, um, uh, so, so this report gives us information about the accidents and the weapons that are used in these incidences as a function of specific years. Although we don't have information here, you can see the number of accidents each year for a specific set of periods. I think it's around 2012 and going back 4 years. I could be wrong, but it gives us like percentage. The 55% of um, the hunting accidents um, were in the form of rifles in that particular year, 32% through rifles in that year, and 48% and so on and so forth. And the same percentage across years where there was an accident in hunting through shotguns, handguns, muzzleloaders, bows. So you can see, you can get a lot of information about you. First of all, you can be certain that there is a database. That's how, or that's why you're able to summarize this report. The other thing is that you can also um, imagine what the data looks like or the database looks like. You can think that, okay, there is a specific database specific to the accident, and it not only reports accident, but it also reports the specific the specific weapon that is used in the accident. So by looking at the report, you should be able to actually gather a lot of information about the database itself. Well, the question then, let's end this particular chapter with this particular question, like how do we uncover this data forms and data reports? So in the next slide, we'll talk about um, ways that you can access web forms or just forms, and ways you can access reports specific to departments. That's what we'll do in the next slides. Okay, so how to get access to or reach or uncover these forms and reports? Well, the simple thing is Google. uh, but not the simple interface of Google search, but actually using the advanced search. You can either go to google.com and select advanced search option, or you can just type in the URL www.google.com/, advanced 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 underscore search. When you do that, then an interface pops up, and this interface is definitely way different from the usual Google search interface. Now, the beauty of this advanced search interface is that you can look for specific um, content. Like you can use like you can type in form, so you'll get all forms. You can type in report if you're looking for reports, and not only that, you can type in the content specific information like the phrase or exact word like accident or firearms or credit card or whatever. You can also deselect or filter and say I don't want anything related to this. Then you can specifically ask for English. You can look at the region, specific country. You can also provide information generally or specifically about the domain of the site itself. For instance, if you're only interested in the data collected from .edu, you can just put .edu here. Or if you are only collecting data or interested in collecting or looking at forms on the government websites, you can say .gov. Or if you're specifically looking at the Department of Education of Pennsylvania, you can actually go to their website and copy this URL and put that information here. So instead of browsing through and see where they are, where the forms and reports are on the site, you can put that link in here and search for the forms or reports that are on this website. So and you can specifically access or request or search for information of a specific kind, like maybe Excel sheets, or you might want PDF files, or any other such forms that specifically you are looking at. So, so these are some tricks about. Keep in mind that you may also explore the specific website of interest to look at or look for forms and reports. But this is even more better because you are without processing or without exploring it, you're actually pulling all their most relevant information in a single hit or a single click. Okay, in the next slide, I'll actually walk you through what we just discussed on this slide in a short video in the next slide. So if you type in www.google.com, and you'll go to a usual Google search page. But if you do google.com/advanced_search, then you'll go to a different interface. And you can look for specifically either a form or a report. And you can select there are other options like the content, the words you're looking for, the language, the region, and so on and so forth. But the important thing is you can look for the form or the report at a general level, where you can look for forms in all government agencies or .edu places, um, or you can specifically ask for information, say www.usi.edu. So let's see what happens here. And you can request for look for specific kinds of forms, Excel sheets or PDF files, and so on and so forth. So let's look for a new form, and so here form in particular website USI. So that'll give you all the forms. Now, if you look at the syntax, this is called the syntax. It starts with for what you're looking for, form, then the site itself, which is www.usi.edu. You can look at, if you say form, I can get rid of this. Once you get used to it, so you can just type form from site, um, let's say .gov. So you don't need to go back to the advanced search if you get used to this and remember the syntax. Or you can look for all .edu sites. So this, or you can look for a specific kind. So the more you use this advanced search, the easier it becomes as you get good at it, and then you don't need to select these options. You can automatically type in the syntax. Well, this is a quick video that I wanted to add to this particular video lecture.